He wanted silence. If you had to say something, you made it sound as awful as possible.
And I say marijuana is a killer drug.
But by and large, there was nothing they could do about it. There was no real big action. They didn't have the funding. They didn't have the people. And I remember he said to me once, I was driving around the upper Potomac, and I was crossing the bridge, and I just parked on the bridge, and I got out and I looked, and there was marijuana plants as far as you could see. And he said, I said to myself, then they want me to wipe this out.
Anslinger can do nothing to stop the push from states of the Southwest for a federal law against marijuana. The issue is less about the dangers of the drugs and more about politics. Marijuana is entangled in immigration problems.
I remember when I interviewed Harry Anslinger about it, he said we weren't having any trouble with it. You could get it in Harlem, he said, and it was not a problem. But the pressure came from the Southwest and the West, where the Mexican immigrants were seen as a unnecessary and dangerous surplus population. And so there was a tremendous campaign to try to push the Mexican immigrants back into Mexico. And marijuana got mixed up in that, because there was no question that they grew marijuana and smoked marijuana.
In the end, the southwestern states prevail upon Anslinger to do something. Hesitant as he may have been, the pressure is on for Anslinger to use the power of the federal government to control marijuana. Ever the bureaucrat, Anslinger changes his position and becomes a leading warrior against marijuana.
The Treasury Department intends to pursue a relentless warfare against the despicable, dope-peddling vulture who preys on the weakness of his fellow man.
His chief weapons are movies that express exaggerated dangers of the drug.
The truth is that every reefer is loaded with immorality and bestial perversions, brutality, murder, sex crimes, insanity, or suicide.
While a propaganda war against marijuana is underway, Anslinger begins working to draft a law. But what kind of law? Like all federal drug prohibition in the early 20th century, the Constitution stands in the way. He finds a way around that in a new law passed to ban machine guns.
A law was passed called the National Firearms Act, which said that you could not give, borrow, or transfer a machine gun to anyone without a machine gun transfer stamp. And it turns out the government would not make any machine gun transfer stamps. So this went up to the Supreme Court on the grounds that this couldn't be legitimate taxing measure because they weren't doing anything to get the taxes. It was actually just a way to stop machine guns being distributed.
The Supreme Court ruled the National Firearms Act was legal, and its use of stamps, even though purposely not available, was legitimate. Anslinger now has a model for a national ban against marijuana.
Anslinger told me that the general counsel of the Treasury Department came into his office holding this decision by the Supreme Court, saying, look, we have a way to go after marijuana.
Anslinger's idea to make marijuana illegal is simple. Anyone involved in its use, distribution, sale, or transfer will be required to get from the government a marijuana tax stamp. But the catch is, the government will only make a token number of tax stamps available. But can he convince Congress that a weed is as dangerous as a machine gun?
The next tragedy may be that of your daughter, or your son, or yours, or yours, or yours.
On April 27, 1937, hearings begin before Congress on the first federal law to control marijuana. Anslinger hopes to convince Congress that marijuana is dangerous, and that they will enact a law like the one that banned machine guns.
I think his attitude toward marijuana was that it was not as serious as cocaine and heroin, but you wouldn't know that publicly because one of the strategies against marijuana was to describe it in so horrible and disgusting a way that no one would be tempted to try it once.
What's the matter with you, son?
Anslinger tells Congress the drug makes the user insane or worse.
Oh, nuts. I didn't do it on purpose. Of course she did. But rather than argue with them, the mother stoops to pick it up, and when she does, Elvin takes that heavy frying pan from the stove and kills his mother with it. This is exactly what happened and how it happened. In fact, he said...
Anslinger also tells Congress marijuana is the stepping stone or gateway to heroin and cocaine.
One more, folks, or I'll be floating.
I want something stronger. How much have you got?
He adds that it is the assassin of youth.
One of the cases that he was constantly presenting in these congressional hearings was the case of Victor Licata, who was a young boy in Florida who cut up his family with an axe. And according to Harry Anslinger, he did this after smoking a marijuana joint. He then went out and chopped up his mother and father.
But what Anslinger omitted in his testimony, as was published several days later in the Tampa newspaper, that Licata was probably schizophrenic, and there's very little probability that marijuana was the cause and effect of the terrible crime he committed.